The room was eerily quiet except for the rhythmic creak of packing tape being stretched across cardboard boxes. A young black woman, Maya Thompson, stood in the center of her modest apartment, surrounded by the remnants of her life. The walls, once adorned with family photos and artwork, now lay bare. Maya had called this place home for 5 years, until now. Her landlord, Mr. Henry Caldwell, a man in his late 50s with a sharp suit and an even sharper tone, had served her an eviction notice 2 months ago. The reason? Alleged late rent payments. But Maya knew the truth. She had never missed a payment. She believed there was something deeper, something uglier, behind the eviction. In a community grappling with gentrification, Maya's situation wasn't unique. Long-term tenants were being pushed out to make way for wealthier renters. But Maya's case felt personal. It's not just the apartment, she thought. It's the principle. It's my dignity. Maya decided to fight back. She gathered her receipts, her bank statements, and her courage. Little did she know, her decision to challenge Mr. Caldwell in court would become a story that would ripple far beyond her small neighborhood. The stakes were high. For Maya, it was about justice and a roof over her head. For Mr. Caldwell, it was about his reputation and control over his property. And for the court, it was a chance to weigh in on a case that symbolized the larger issues of race, power, and fairness in America today. Maya's troubles had started subtly. At first, it was the minor inconveniences, delayed responses to maintenance requests, unexpected visits from the landlord, and notices about new rules that seemed to apply only to her. Over time, the interactions became more hostile. Mr. Caldwell accused her of causing damage to the property, an allegation Maya found absurd. "I've always taken care of this place like it's my own," she explained to her neighbor, Mrs. Harris, an elderly woman who had also noticed Mr. Caldwell's increasingly aggressive behavior. "But it's like he's looking for reasons to get rid of me." The final blow came in the form of a notice slipped under her door. She had 30 days to vacate. The stated reason? Non-payment of rent for 2 months. But Maya had the receipts to prove otherwise. She even had bank records showing her payments were cleared on time. Maya approached Mr. Caldwell to resolve the matter directly, hoping it was a misunderstanding. Instead, their conversation left her shaken. "This isn't personal," Mr. Caldwell had said, leaning back in his office chair. His smile was tight, his tone dismissive. "It's just business." "But I've paid every cent on time," Maya argued, holding up her proof. He waved her off. "Your kind always tries to find loopholes, but the paperwork is clear. You can argue all you want, but I've already started the process." That phrase, "your kind," echoed in her mind long after she left his office. It wasn't the first time she had heard it, but coming from her landlord, it felt like a punch to the gut. Maya's friends encouraged her to let it go. "It's not worth the fight," they said. "Just find another place." But Maya couldn't let it go. She saw Mr. Caldwell's actions as part of a larger pattern, a systemic issue where people like her were pushed out of neighborhoods they had helped build. Determined to fight, Maya reached out to legal aid. Her case was taken on by Jason Lopez, a young attorney passionate about tenant rights. "We'll contest this," he assured her. "But you need to be prepared. Cases like this are uphill battles, especially when race and power dynamics are at play." Jason's investigation revealed startling details. Mr. Caldwell had a history of evicting tenants, and most of them were people of color. "He's targeting vulnerable tenants," Jason explained, probably hoping they won't have the resources or energy to fight back. Maya felt a mix of anger and resolve. "I'll fight this. Not just for me, but for everyone he's done this to." The weeks leading up to the court date were a whirlwind of preparation. Jason gathered evidence, including Maya's payment records, testimonies from neighbors, and even instances where Mr. Caldwell had made discriminatory remarks. Maya, meanwhile, found herself reliving every moment of stress and indignity she had endured over the past few months. The community began to take notice. Local activists rallied behind Maya, organizing a small protest outside Mr. Caldwell's office. Signs reading, "Justice for Tenants" and "Stop Discrimination" appeared on street corners. But as the pressure mounted, so did the backlash. Mr. Caldwell painted himself as the victim of an unfair smear campaign. "I've done nothing wrong," he claimed in interviews. "This is about holding tenants accountable." Maya couldn't help but feel the weight of it all. The case wasn't just about her anymore. It was about challenging a system that seemed stacked against people like her. The courtroom was packed on the day of the trial. Maya sat at the plaintiff's table, her hands trembling slightly, but her resolve unshaken. Jason Lopez, her attorney, flipped through the neatly organized files on the desk before him. Across the room sat Mr. Caldwell, his expression confident, his lawyer whispering something in his ear. The judge, a middle-aged woman with a firm yet empathetic demeanor, called the court to order. "This is a case of alleged unlawful eviction and claims of racial discrimination," she began. "Let us proceed with opening arguments." Jason stood first. "Your Honor, this case is not merely about one tenant and one landlord. It's about a pattern of systemic abuse. Ms. Thompson has been unfairly targeted, and the evidence will show that this eviction was not due to non-payment of rent, but rather a discriminatory motive on the part of Mr. Caldwell." Caldwell's lawyer countered with a rehearsed tone of confidence. "Your Honor, this is a straightforward case of a tenant failing to meet her obligations. Any suggestion of discrimination is baseless and an attempt to deflect from the real issue." The judge nodded, her face unreadable, and the trial began in earnest. Jason called Maya to the stand first. Her voice was steady as she recounted the events leading to her eviction, describing how she had provided proof of her rent payments and how Mr. Caldwell had dismissed her concerns. "Ms. Thompson, how did Mr. Caldwell respond when you presented your evidence?" Jason asked. "He told me it didn't matter," Maya said, "and he used the phrase 'you're kind,' which felt demeaning and discriminatory." Caldwell's lawyer immediately objected. "Speculative." The judge overruled the objection. "The witness may continue." Next, Jason presented bank statements showing that Maya's rent payments had been processed on time every month. He also introduced emails and text messages between Maya and Mr. Caldwell, where he made dismissive and occasionally hostile remarks. But the most damning piece of evidence came from a former tenant of Mr. Caldwell's who agreed to testify. "Mr. Caldwell evicted me under similar circumstances," the man said. "I had paid my rent, but he claimed I hadn't. It wasn't until I moved out that I realized he was raising the rent and bringing in new tenants willing to pay more. I also heard him make comments about cleaning up the neighborhood, which I took to mean getting rid of people like me." The courtroom buzzed with murmurs. When it was Mr. Caldwell's turn to testify, his confidence began to waver under Jason's sharp questioning. "Mr. Caldwell, are you aware of how many of your evictions have involved tenants of color?" Jason asked. "I don't keep track of that," Caldwell replied, shifting in his seat. Jason pressed on. "Do you deny that you referred to Ms. Thompson's kind during your conversation with her?" "I don't recall saying that," Caldwell said, his voice faltering. The judge leaned forward. "Answer the question directly, Mr. Caldwell." "I might have said something like that, but it wasn't meant in a negative way," he stammered. Jason let the silence hang in the air before delivering his final blow. "Your Honor, this pattern of behavior cannot be ignored. It is clear that Mr. Caldwell has consistently acted in bad faith, driven by discriminatory motives." After closing arguments, the courtroom held its breath as the judge prepared to deliver her verdict. She addressed both parties, her voice firm and resolute. "This case has revealed troubling patterns of behavior on the part of the defendant," she began. "The evidence presented shows not only that Ms. Thompson's rent was paid on time, but also that Mr. Caldwell's actions were motivated by prejudice. This court rules in favor of the plaintiff, Ms. Thompson, and orders the defendant to compensate her for damages, as well as cover her legal fees." Gasps and whispers filled the room as Mr. Caldwell's face turned pale. For Maya, the decision was a vindication not just for herself, but for everyone who had suffered under unjust systems. The courtroom erupted in a mix of cheers and stunned silence as the verdict settled over the room. Maya exhaled deeply, her shoulders sinking with relief. For months, she had carried the weight of uncertainty, wondering if the system would protect her or perpetuate the injustices she'd faced. Now, the answer was clear. The judge's ruling was a groundbreaking moment. Not only was Maya awarded damages for emotional distress and wrongful eviction, but the court also mandated Mr. Caldwell to attend anti-discrimination training and submit to a review of his other properties for similar patterns of behavior. Outside the courthouse, a crowd of supporters had gathered, holding signs that read "Justice for Tenants" and "No Room for Racism." When Maya emerged, applause and chants greeted her. She felt a wave of emotions: pride, gratitude, and a renewed sense of purpose. The case quickly gained attention in local media, and soon after, national outlets picked up the story. Headlines like "Landlord Held Accountable for Discrimination in Landmark Ruling" flooded social media. Activist groups highlighted Maya's story as an example of how individuals could challenge systemic injustice and win. Maya found herself thrust into the spotlight. She began receiving messages from tenants across the country who shared similar stories of discrimination and wrongful evictions. Some thanked her for her bravery. Others asked for advice on how to fight back in their own situations. At first, the attention overwhelmed her. "I'm just one person," she told Jason during one of their conversations. "I didn't set out to start a movement." Jason smiled. Sometimes, one person's fight can inspire change in ways they never imagined. For Henry Caldwell, the aftermath of the trial was anything but pleasant. The court's decision tarnished his reputation, and his properties became the subject of intense scrutiny. Tenants previously afraid to speak up now came forward with complaints about his practices, forcing him to address years of neglect and misconduct. At first, Caldwell resisted. He viewed himself as a victim of cancel culture and insisted he had been unfairly targeted. But as the months passed and he was required to attend court-ordered training, something shifted. In one particularly poignant session, he listened to stories from people who had experienced housing discrimination. For the first time, he began to see his actions from a perspective he had never considered. In a rare public statement months after the trial, Caldwell admitted, "I didn't understand the harm I was causing. I'm working to change that now." The victory wasn't just Maya's. It belonged to the entire community. The ruling emboldened local tenants to demand better treatment from landlords, and it spurred lawmakers to revisit housing policies. Discussions about rent control, anti-discrimination laws, and tenant protections gained traction in city council meetings. Maya became an advocate almost unintentionally. She started speaking at town halls and community events, sharing her story to inspire others. "This isn't just about me," she would say. "It's about making sure no one else has to go through what I did." Her efforts led to the creation of a tenants' rights group, which provided resources and legal aid to those facing similar challenges. The organization, aptly named Thompson Tenants United, became a beacon of hope for people across the city. For Maya, the journey wasn't without its challenges. The stress of the trial and its aftermath had taken a toll, and she struggled to balance her newfound activism with her personal life. But as time went on, she found strength in her community and the positive changes her case had sparked. She moved into a new apartment, a brighter, larger space that felt like a fresh start. Standing by the window one evening, she reflected on how far she had come. "This isn't the end," she thought. "It's just the beginning." Months after the trial, Maya sat in a sunlit cafe, scrolling through an article on her phone. The headline read, "Tenants' Victory Sparks Nationwide Movement for Housing Justice." It was surreal to see her own name mentioned as a catalyst for change. The ripple effects of her case had reached far beyond her city. Activists, legal experts, and politicians were citing her story as an example of how ordinary people could stand up to injustice and win. New legislation aimed at strengthening tenant protections was being introduced in several states, inspired by the media attention her case had generated. Maya reflected on how much had changed since that fateful day when she first found the eviction notice. Back then, she had felt small, powerless against a system that seemed indifferent to her struggles. Now, she understood the power of perseverance and community support. In Maya's neighborhood, the impact was undeniable. Other tenants who had faced similar injustices began organizing and advocating for their rights. Landlords, feeling the pressure of increased scrutiny, became more cautious in their dealings. One of the most significant victories came when the City Council passed a new ordinance requiring landlords to provide clear documentation for evictions and undergo anti-discrimination training. The ordinance, unofficially dubbed Maya's Law, was a testament to her courage and the collective effort of the community. Even businesses in the area began to shift their focus, with local organizations launching initiatives to preserve affordable housing and prevent further displacement of longtime residents. Despite her newfound role as a community leader, Maya made time to focus on her own healing. She began therapy to process the stress and trauma of the past year. Her therapist encouraged her to celebrate her victories while also setting boundaries to avoid burnout. She also reconnected with her passion for art, which had taken a back seat during the legal battle. Maya's first painting after the trial was a striking piece depicting a woman standing tall amidst a storm, her gaze fixed on the light breaking through the clouds. "It's about resilience," she explained when the piece was displayed at a local gallery. "No matter how fierce the storm, we can endure and find our way to brighter days." Years later, Maya's case continued to be a reference point in legal and academic discussions about housing discrimination. Law schools included it in their curriculum, and tenant advocacy groups cited it as a turning point in their fight for fair housing policies. Maya's tenants' rights group, Thompson Tenants United, grew into a national organization, providing legal aid and resources to thousands of people across the country. Though she eventually stepped back from her leadership role to focus on her art and personal life, Maya remained a trusted advisor and mentor to new advocates. As for Mr. Caldwell, his transformation was gradual but genuine. The court-ordered training sessions and community backlash forced him to confront his biases. Over time, he became an advocate for fair housing himself, using his platform to educate other landlords about the importance of ethical practices. On the 5th anniversary of the trial, Maya stood at a podium in front of a packed auditorium, delivering the keynote address at a housing justice conference. "My story is just one of many," she began, her voice steady and filled with conviction. "But it proves that when we stand up against injustice, we can create real change, not just for ourselves, but for entire communities." She paused, looking out at the audience. "The fight for justice isn't easy, and it isn't always quick. But every step we take brings us closer to a world where fairness and equality aren't just ideals, they're reality. And that's a fight worth fighting." As the audience rose to their feet in applause, Maya felt a sense of closure. The journey had been long and arduous, but it had also been transformative. Her story wasn't just about an eviction. It was about resilience, justice, and the power of one voice to inspire many.